Bienvenidos a la serie Personajes del canal del Congreso. Soy Rina Musali y estoy encantada de que me acompañen en este espacio. El día de hoy tenemos la oportunidad de conversar con la doctora Wasko. Ella es experta en la política económica de la comunicación y también es profesora de la Escuela de Periodismo y de Comunicación de la Universidad de Oregon en Estados Unidos. Además, ella es autora de numerosas publicaciones y libros que tratan sobre los medios de comunicación en Estados Unidos y los productos culturales. Janet, welcome to the Congress TV channel. We're very grateful to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
United States is a leading global player in the communication and entertainment media industry. Could you give us an overview of what's happening with media industry in your country?
Okay, I can try to do that. It's a very big field and growing, quite a bit in terms of new media, so it's very difficult to sometimes keep track of what's going on. But I think first the traditional media, the media that have been there for a while I think television is still a very, very important medium, and whereas in the past there have been basically 3 national networks for television, now there are a couple of more networks nationally, and also increasingly more and more cable channels which have drawn the audience away a little bit from the network television channels. So in terms of radio, we have a couple of very, very big companies that dominate in radio, national chains of radio stations. It's still an important medium, but not as much as it was at one time. And then, of course, newspapers in the United States, at least, are having, they say, a very difficult time because they're losing readers and people are turning to other media. Right. Yes. But newspapers are also then creating online versions of their newspapers. And so in some ways they may not be losing so many readers, but they're not selling as many newspapers. Magazines are still very, very strong, very important. And of course, the film industry is still dominated by Hollywood, which is extremely strong and very much dominates the market for film and DVDs and so forth. Of course, there's also the new media that is expanding rapidly. There's a lot of different media on internet. We're mostly familiar, I think, in other countries about those kinds of developments. But what is interesting is that all of those activities sometimes are part of the same companies, and so we have these very large.
The concentration media.
Yeah, we have a concentration of media owners, meaning that we have just a handful of companies that are involved in all of these media. They're called media conglomerates. They're very strong and powerful, and also, of course, don't just own media in the United States, but distribute their products to other countries around the world.
Janet, we know that the U.S. economy is facing its worst crisis since the Great Depression. What are the implications of this situation for media industry in the United States?
To some extent, there has been some effect, specifically in terms of the amount of money that people are paying for media, for instance, and so the companies have had to cut back a bit in terms of, for instance, budgets for films or the number of films that they produce and so forth. But in many ways, these very large companies, they're doing just fine. They report profits. They continue to report profits. That doesn't mean that some people have not lost their jobs, but maybe that's why they're reporting profits. So in some ways, you might say that, except for newspapers and the newspaper industry, which seems to be having a difficult time, I think the rest of the media is really doing just fine.
Could you explain to us and to the audience of the Congress TV channel which are the links between the government and the private media industry in the United States?
Yes, the media in the United States, for the most part, is privately owned, meaning that it's organized by companies that are organized for profit. They're owned privately. This is the case for newspapers, for magazines, for film, the film industry, and so forth. For television and radio and telecommunications, there is some regulation, specifically for broadcast stations. They must receive a license, individual stations, from the government, from a regulatory agency, which is the Federal Communications Commission. That body also produces regulations that guide the broadcast industry, that guide broadcasting in the United States. Regulations, for instance, like how much advertising is possible in children's shows and other kinds of regulations. But of course, as many people know, there's been a deregulation process over the last few decades, and less regulation is the case now. And of course, the private industries, the private companies don't mind that at all. In fact, they lobby very strongly for that kind of deregulation.
As we all know, communication media in the United States is controlled by large profit corporations. All these corporations are involved in lobby activities at Congress.
Yes. Some of those lobbying groups that represent these various industries are quite strong. I can tell you about the one that represents the film industry, the film major companies, called the Motion Picture Association of America. Very strong with lobbying for various kinds of, not just to avoid regulations, but sometimes they lobby for assistance when they export films internationally. Sometimes they lobby for assistance with piracy. So they have a relationship where they try to get the government to, first of all, not regulate, but to assist in their marketing of their products.
How do you think globalization, business culture, and media industry are affecting politics and also democracy?
Well, it's, I would imagine, similar to Mexico in that they are very, very important. It's the way that people, citizens, receive the information.
The messages.
Yes. How can we make decisions about what's going on in our society without information? And that information these days comes from the mass media, for the most part. Also about choosing representatives, choosing the government. We receive information, but also there's still a lot of political advertising, political activity, now that especially we're coming up to a new presidential election.
Elections in 2012.
Yes. So there's a lot of increasing activity around that election, not only coverage by the media of that election process of candidates, but also the candidates advertise through the media.
Janet, you wrote a book about how Hollywood works as an industry. Which has been the influence of Hollywood in branding a global culture?
Well, Hollywood...
Yes, this is a huge question, but I would like to hear you.
Hollywood has been for many, many years. It's not a new phenomenon that Hollywood distributes, sells its movies internationally. Since the 1920s. So it's not a new phenomenon at all for Hollywood to have a global presence. So first of all, I think there's an acceleration of that globalization. People are realizing it more. More media is distributed globally. Um, and in terms of Hollywood, they often set the model for filmmaking around the world, meaning that countries that makes films look to Hollywood as a model. But also because Hollywood still dominates the markets for film. There's growing competition from other countries that are making more films, but still Hollywood dominates with as much in any one year as maybe 80% of the box office in a particular country going to Hollywood movies. It varies according to the year, according to the country, but if you look around the world, you still see that they are very dominant in global box office. So you have to say that people then around the world are seeing American films. Now, what kind of influence on
the
global culture?
Yes.
It's a very good question. It's one of those issues that may be difficult to study, difficult to generalize about. But certainly there's a recognition of a lot of American kinds of products, of American culture, of I think one of the things that happens, this is not just Hollywood, but the media in general, is you go different places around the world and you see people with similar kinds of fashion or styles or looks, for instance. So where does that come from? Well, the companies that are distributing those products, those clothes and so forth, but also where do people see them in the media, in Hollywood films, perhaps?
I would like to talk a little bit about a gender perspective or gender approach in the media industry. For example, you have taught on Disney studies at the University of Oregon, and you also have several books related to this issue. The question is, what do you think about the company's treatment of women? Is there any empowering examples at Disney broadcasting?
Okay, the issue of Disney and women is a very interesting one. And in fact, when I teach the course that I teach on Disney with college students, it's very interesting to talk about the representation of women in Disney films, for instance. And it's one of those issues that opens the eyes very often of students, especially some of them who have never really thought about what it means, the way that Disney represents women in a very similar way all the time. And it begins some very lively discussions. On the one hand, if you look historically at how Disney has represented women, princesses and so forth, Snow White is a classic example, you can see that there are all the stereotypes of being submissive, passive, innocent, and only interested in marrying the prince. However, things have changed, and so if you look at some of the newer Disney heroines, they're a little different. They're not as passive, maybe have other interests and so forth, but unfortunately, very many of them still are very interested only in marrying, and also are very interested in that living happily ever after with a prince. So sometimes things have changed, but maybe not so much. It's a real controversial topic because many of the students, especially some of the women, are very defensive. They do think that things have changed with women's representation by Disney.
Do you think that the economic system, or maybe the capitalism, has built a culture based on male domination and women's subordination? What's happening with media? They are spreading out all these messages and all these patterns related to discrimination for women.
The issue of women in the media is an extremely interesting one, and it's not an area that I specifically do some research on, but I'm here visiting some people at UNAM who do some wonderful work in this area. And it's an issue that has been studied more and more by women and others who study the media. And they look at the representation of women in the media, and actually one might think that certainly things have changed and there's better representation. There are more women, for instance, in the news, or more women represented as intelligent, strong women in the media. However, we can find so many examples of still stereotypical representation, and some, certainly it's easy to call it kind of sexist treatment of women. Why does that happen is a very big question. One of the issues that was discussed, the main issue at this seminar that I attended, was the issue of women working in the media. And the discussion also involved whether or not the media would be different if more women were involved in making media. And quite lively discussion of that. One of the issues, one of the arguments is that not only do we need more women working in the media, but maybe even owning the media. Because there are so few. In fact, in both of our countries, very, very few women. I think in the United States, for instance, less than 2% of the television stations are owned by women. And I thought that was absolutely ridiculous and terrible until I heard the situation in Mexico, which is possibly even worse. So there's a lot of more attention being given to this issue by media researchers, and hopefully as their work is spread, it will draw attention to by more people. I think maybe what is needed is possibly some kind of public intervention into the situation, possibly by the government, but maybe other public institutions, to encourage women to get into the media and so forth.
The media industry, do they have any responsibility to contribute for development of the women?
Right. One would think that the media industries would, since they are so important, be leading the attempts to have a more equitable media industry in terms of representation, as well as people working in the media, minorities and media, and women. However, I have to say that they haven't necessarily helped in many of these cases. Certainly the issue of ownership is not something that the media themselves are going to help with. But they do have to attend to what the audiences think in terms of representation of women sometimes. So I think that's why we see a lot more women as news anchors on news programs, and quite a few more women represented in the media, sometimes in a more positive way.
Janet, one final question. How can we improve journalism with a gender approach in the less developed countries?
I think that it's actually quite similar in any country, is that there needs to be, first of all, recognition, but also support of issues relating to equality. We need to have media systems as well as societies who are dedicated to having equal representation, equal involvement in all aspects of society, including the media. The media have a special role in this process, though, because they are places where people look to learn about society and so forth. So they need to be very, very specifically involved in these issues of equality and justice, and I would also say democracy as well.
Democracy as well. Okay. So thank you, Janet, for this interview. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to talking to you in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias a todas las personas que nos acompañan en la serie Personajes del Canal del Congreso. Soy Rina Musali y espero que les haya gustado esta entrevista que tuvimos con la doctora Janet Wasko de la Universidad de Oregon en Estados Unidos. Hasta pronto.